Have you ever wondered what truly haunts a man who seems to have everything? Rory Mcilroy stood motionless at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his Palm Beach mansion, staring at the Atlantic Ocean but seeing nothing. The morning sun painted the water with diamonds, a display of natural wealth that matched his own material fortune. His reflection in the glass showed a man physically fit, dressed in casual designer clothes worth more than what most people earn in a month. Yet inside, where no cameras could capture, where no fans could see, Rory's hands trembled slightly as he held the small white envelope, Vatican postmark, his name handwritten in age-shaking script that somehow conveyed dignity even in its fragility. 3 days earlier, the world had received the news that Pope Francis was entering hospice care. Doctors gave him weeks, perhaps days. The announcement had dominated headlines, triggering global reflection on the Pope's legacy and speculation about succession. For most people, including Rory, it had been significant but distant news until this morning, when the envelope arrived. Somehow, in what must have been among his final acts, the Pope had written to him, Rory Mcilroy, a man who hadn't stepped inside a church since his grandmother's funeral 15 years ago. A man whose relationship with faith was complicated at best, non-existent at worst. The weight of the unopened letter seemed to grow heavier by the second. What could the dying leader of the Catholic Church possibly want with him? Was it a generic message sent to various celebrities? No. The handwriting was too personal, too deliberate. A memory flashed unbidden. Rome, 5 years earlier. A children's hospital. A boy with wise eyes. A promise made that Rory had never told anyone about. A promise he had failed to keep. His phone buzzed relentlessly on the marble countertop. His agent, his sponsors, interview requests. The outside world demanding pieces of him, as it always did. But for once, Rory couldn't move to answer. The constant digital summons that normally dictated his every moment seemed suddenly trivial compared to the paper in his hand. Some things reach you exactly when you need them most, his grandmother used to say in her soft Northern Irish lilt. Not when you want them, but when your soul requires them. As a child, he'd found the saying comforting. As an adult, he'd dismissed it as superstition. Now, standing in the echoing emptiness of his perfect home, those words returned with unexpected force. Rory's fingers broke the seal on the envelope. The paper inside was simple, unadorned, not official Vatican letterhead, but personal stationery. He unfolded it carefully, feeling as though he was handling something far more fragile than paper. What he read in those next moments would alter the course of his life in ways no championship, no victory, no achievement ever could. 5 years earlier, Rome had been nothing more than another stop on Rory's endless global circuit. The Eternal City, with its ancient splendors, had been reduced to hotel rooms, cars with tinted windows, and obligations meticulously scheduled by his team. He had agreed to the children's hospital visit as a courtesy to a sponsor, a brief appearance, some photos with sick kids to generate positive press, then back to preparing for the next tournament. His calendar allowed exactly 90 minutes for the entire engagement. St. Peter's Children's Hospital was a modest facility, the shadow of the Vatican, its aging facade a stark contrast to the gleaming private clinic where Rory received his own medical care. The hospital director had greeted him with appropriate gratitude, cameras flashing as they shook hands in the lobby, adorned with faded crucifixes and dated medical equipment. Sister Gabriella, a no-nonsense nun in her 60s with calloused hands and intelligent eyes, had guided him through wards of sick children, most too young to know who he was. Some parents recognized him, of course, their excitement a brief respite from the worry etched on their faces. "This is Marco," Sister Gabriella had said, gesturing to a boy who couldn't have been more than 8 years old. Unlike the other children, Marco's eyes held no excitement. No wonder, just a deep, unsettling wisdom that made Rory shift uncomfortably. Marco was thin, his skin nearly translucent, with dark circles beneath eyes too old for his face. His room was different from the others. While most children had toys, games, or stuffed animals, Marco's space was dominated by a small desk covered with intricate drawings of buildings, cathedrals mostly, with impossible arches and towers that seemed to defy physics. A worn Bible sat beside them, its pages tabbed with colored markers. "Marco doesn't speak much anymore," Sister Gabriella explained quietly. "Leukemia, advanced. The doctors say week, perhaps a month. Rory had nodded mechanically, prepared to offer the same practiced encouragement he had given in dozens of similar situations. A gentle touch on the shoulder, a smile that conveyed optimism without promising anything. A signed photograph that would be meaningless to a child who didn't follow golf. But then Marco had spoken, his voice surprisingly clear, cutting through the antiseptic hospital air. "You're lost too, aren't you?" he had asked in accented English. The question had struck Rory like a physical blow. In that sterile hospital room, surrounded by the boy's architectural drawings, he had felt suddenly transparent, as if this dying child could see through the carefully constructed facade he presented to the world. "I'm not," Rory had started to deny reflexively, then stopped. Something in Marco's gaze made dishonesty impossible. The silence between them stretched uncomfortably. Sister Gabriella, sensing something significant passing between them, had quietly stepped outside the room. "Everyone thinks I'm afraid to die," Marco had continued, his small fingers tracing the outline of a cathedral spire on his drawing. "But I'm not. I'm only afraid of dying without having built anything that matters." Rory had found himself sitting in a small chair beside Marco's bed, without consciously deciding to do so. "You're building the," Rory had offered, gesturing to the drawing. Marco had smiled faintly. "These are just ideas, blueprints. They're not real. Real enough to me," Rory had said, studying a particularly intricate drawing of a cathedral with soaring buttresses and elaborate rose windows. Marco had reached for the drawing and pressed it into Rory's hand. "When you build something that reaches toward heaven," Marco had said softly, "you have to start by digging deep into the earth. The higher you want to go, the deeper you must dig first." "Who taught you that?" Rory had asked. "My great-uncle," Marco had replied. "He knows about building things that last." The conversation had shifted then to lighter topics. Marco had asked about places Rory had traveled, not about golf, but about the cities, the architecture, the people. For 40 minutes, 30 longer than scheduled, Rory had found himself engaged in the most genuine conversation he'd had in years. As his assistant had signaled from the doorway that they needed to leave, Marco had reached for Rory's hand. "If you ever find your foundation," he had whispered, his grip surprisingly strong, "will you come back and tell me how?" "Before I go?" Rory had promised. A casual promise to a dying boy, one he had never fulfilled. He had learned 3 weeks later that Marco had passed away. The news had come via a brief email from the hospital's public relations office, thanking him again for his visit and noting that the boy you spent time with, Marco Bergoglio, had succumbed to his illness. He had sent flowers, made a donation to the hospital's oncology department, then buried the memory beneath the relentless pace of his scheduled life. What Rory couldn't have known then was that Marco had been the Pope's grandnephew, or that the dying boy had written to his great-uncle about the lost man who plays golf in his final journal. He couldn't have known that his brief visit had become a topic of conversation between a young boy facing death and an aging pontiff contemplating his own mortality. The Pope's handwriting was surprisingly strong for a man in his final days, though certain letters trembled with the effort of their creation. The letter was written on simple stationery, not official Vatican letterhead, a personal communication, not a papal decree. "Dear Mr. McIlroy, as I prepare to meet my Creator, I find myself thinking of stories unfinished and promises unkept. Not by you, by me. My grandnephew Marco spoke of you often in his final week, not of your accomplishments, which are many, but of what he called the hunger in your eye. He was a perceptive child, gifted with seeing not what a person is, but what they might become. Among his possessions was a journal. In it, he wrote that he had asked you to return when you found your foundation. He believed you would someday, though perhaps too late for him to witness it." Marco understood, even at 8 years old, what many never grasp in a lifetime, that our greatest achievements are meaningless if built without foundation, that no amount of external success can fill an internal void. The drawing he gave you, did you keep it? It was his rendering of a cathedral that exists only in imagination. The impossible church, he called it, a structure reaching skyward from foundations so deep they connect to the center of the earth itself. I do not write to burden you with an old man's sentimentality. I write because Marco's journal contained a message he wanted delivered to you should you not return before his passing. As my final act of duty to him, I pass it to you now. The foundation isn't something you find, Mr. McIlroy. It's something you build, stone by stone, with every choice that honors the person you truly are, rather than the person the world desires you to be. But perhaps these words from a child you met briefly will mean nothing to you, but should they resonate, know that the greatest gift you could offer to Marco's memory would be to begin digging your foundation, whatever form that takes. May you find peace in the architecture of your own soul. With sincere regard, Francis Rory read the letter 3 times in succession, his vision blurring more with each reading. The weight in his chest became unbearable as a singular, devastating truth emerged. A dying boy had seen through him completely in the span of a single meeting, had recognized the emptiness behind his achievements, the hunger that drove him, but was never satisfied. And now, a dying pope had fulfilled a promise to that boy, while Rory had forgotten his own. The carefully constructed identity he had built over decades, disciplined athlete, marketing asset, global brand, suddenly seemed as substantive as a stage set, all facade with nothing behind it. Outside, the Florida sun continued its ascent, warming the infinity pool to the perfect temperature, illuminating the manicured garden where not a leaf was out of place. Inside, something collapsed within Rory Mcilroy, a structure built on shifting sand finally surrendering to gravity. The tears, when they came, weren't gentle. They were the violent release of a dam long cracked, but never permitted to break. They came from a place so deep within him that Rory hadn't known it existed, a hollow space where authenticity should have lived. He sank to the marble floor, the Pope's letter clutched against his chest, and finally allowed himself to feel the emptiness he had been outrunning for years. The emptiness of achievement without meaning, of recognition without connection, of admiration without love. In the silence of his perfect home, Rory Mcilroy, winner of 4 major championships, one of the wealthiest athletes in the world, a man whose face adorned billboards in dozens of countries, wept like a child who had finally found the words for a pain carried too long without name. 3 days after receiving the letter, Rory sat alone in his home office, surrounded by evidence of a life dedicated to achievement. Trophies gleamed from custom-built shelves, their metal and crystal surfaces reflecting the light in fractured patterns across the walls. Framed magazine covers displayed his image in various poses of triumph. A wall calendar marked with tournaments, appearances, and obligations stretched into the next year, each day parceled into commitments made months or years in advance. Yet his focus remained fixed on a single item, Marco's drawing of the impossible cathedral, which he had indeed kept. For 5 years, it had remained tucked in a portfolio of memorabilia, not displayed, barely remembered, but never discarded. Now it lay before him, its pencil lines faded, but still visible. The drawing was remarkable in its detail, especially coming from the hand of a child. The cathedral it depicted followed no earthly architectural tradition. Its spires twisted in ways that defied structural logic. Its buttresses curved like waves. Its foundations, drawn with particular care, extended deep below the ground line, an elaborate root system that seemed to anchor the building not just to earth, to something deeper. Rory had canceled everything. For the first time in his adult life, he had simply withdrawn from the world without explanation. His team had initially panicked. Sponsors required maintenance, contracts had obligations, his public image needed constant tending. But Rory had been immovable. His phone had eventually stopped ringing as word spread that Mcilroy was taking personal time, a phrase that, in celebrity circle, could mean anything from exhaustion to rehab to personal crisis. In the silence that followed, he had begun to examine the architecture of his life with brutal honesty. When had he last made a decision that wasn't calculated to enhance his career, his brand, his legacy? When had he last felt true passion rather than the drive to accumulate more achievement? When had success become a treadmill rather than a journey? The Pope's letter, or rather Marco's final message, had cracked something open inside him. The idea that his foundation needed to be built, not found, struck him as both obvious and revolutionary. He thought of the cathedral drawing with its impossibly deep foundation. What were the foundations in a human life? What were his? Family? He had drifted from them as his fame grew, faith abandoned in adolescence, friendship. His closest relationships were with his caddy and his agent. On the fourth day of his self-imposed solitude, Rory reached for his phone and made 3 calls. The first was to a childhood friend he hadn't spoken to in years, someone who had known him before fame, before wealth, before the world started telling him who Rory Mcilroy should be. The conversation was awkward at first, then gradually warmed as memories resurfaced. They spoke for 2 hours. The second call was to cancel his appearance at an upcoming high-profile product launch, an obligation worth millions, but that had never felt authentic. His agent was apoplectic. Rory remained firm. The third call was to a number in Rome, to the director of St. Peter's Children's Hospital. He asked about Sister Gabriella, about programs for children with terminal illness, about what they needed most. When asked why, after 5 years, these questions now, Rory had no practiced answer ready. "I'm starting to dig a foundation," he said simply. That night, for the first time since receiving the letter, Rory slept without waking. And when morning came, he began to draw his own impossible cathedral. Not on paper, but in the architecture of choice and meaning. He started with small stones, a call to his parents without an agenda, a walk on the beach without his phone, an hour spent watching the sunset without documenting it for social media. Then, larger one, declining an endorsement that would have added another 8 figures to his net worth, but required him to promote a product he didn't use or believe in. Visiting a local children's hospital without publicity, reconnecting with a coach who had believed in him before he was marketed. Each choice felt simultaneously like a loss and a liberation. The structure of his public identity began to shift subtly at first, then with increasing visibility. Sports journalists noted a new McIlroy emerging in interviews, more thoughtful, less rehearsed. Sponsors whispered about reliability concerns. Fans detected authenticity previously absent. 6 months after receiving the Pope's letter, Rory sat in his lawyer's office, finalizing the details of the Marco Bergoglio Foundation, an organization dedicated to bringing art therapy programs to children's hospitals, with a specific focus on architectural drawing for patients with terminal illness. "The press will speculate about your connection to the Pope's grandnephew," his lawyer warned. "Let them," Rory replied. "Some stories aren't for public consumption." What mattered wasn't the narrative the world would construct around his action. What mattered was that, stone by stone, choice by choice, he was building something that felt true, something with a foundation deep enough to support whatever might rise from it. 1 year later, Rory Mcilroy stood in the newly completed Marco's Place, a bright, airy space within St. Peter's Children's Hospital, where young patients could create art, particularly architectural drawing. The room featured large windows overlooking the Vatican, drawing boards at various heights to accommodate children in wheelchairs or beds, and walls covered with architectural drawings ranging from childish scribbles to near-professional rendering. In the center of the room, displayed in a simple frame, was Marco's original drawing of the impossible cathedral. Rory had donated it to the hospital with the stipulation that it be hung where children could see it daily, not as a memorial, but as inspiration. Sister Gabriella, now retired but still a regular presence at the hospital, watched as Rory sat with a young girl who was sketching a building with impossible angle. The girl's head was bare from chemotherapy, her arms thin, but her eyes bright with creative energy. "It doesn't have to make sense," Rory was telling her. "The most important buildings are the ones we create in our imagination first." The girl nodded seriously. "My doctor says I might not get better," she confided. Rory was silent for a moment. "What are you building that will last?" he finally asked. The girl pointed to her drawing. "This is a house for everyone who feels lonely. See these windows? They're shaped so the light always comes in, even at night." When the girl was called away for treatment, Sister Gabriella approached. "You never told the press why you funded this," she observed, "or why you visited 4 times this year. Speculate, of course." Rory smiled. "Let them. Some things aren't for public consumption." Sister Gabriella studied him. "You're different from the man who visited 5 years ago." "I'm building something," Rory replied. "Slowly, stone by stone. Marco would be pleased," she said simply. "And the Holy Father as well. God rest his soul." That evening, in his hotel room overlooking the Vatican, Rory added to the journal he had begun keeping the day after receiving the Pope's letter. Its pages contained no records of tournaments or achievement, but rather moments of authentic connection, of choices made to honor his true self rather than his public image. On this night, he wrote about the girl with the house designed to eliminate loneliness, about the quality of light in Rome at sunset, about the conversation with Sister Gabriella, and the strange circular journey that had brought him back to the place where a dying child had seen the truth in him. The journal's first page held a quote from Marco via Pope Francis. "The foundation isn't something you find, it's something you build, stone by stone, with every choice that honors the person you truly are, rather than the person the world desires you to be." Below it, Rory had written his response, words never shared publicly, never crafted for consumption, simply his truth. "I never returned to tell you how to find a foundation, Marco, because I hadn't built mine yet, but I'm building it now. And though you can't see it, and though the Pope who carried your message has also departed, I want you both to know, I finally understand the hunger in my eyes that you recognized. It wasn't hunger for achievement. It wasn't for trophies that gather dust or headlines that fade by morning. It wasn't even for the respect of my peers or the adulation of strangers. It was hunger for meaning, raw, unpolished, and terrifyingly honest. A hunger to build something that outlasts the ephemeral nature of athletic glory. Some foundations are visible, hospitals with their gleaming equipment, buildings that pierce skylines, monuments carved from stone to withstand centuries. Others remain invisible but no less real. Choices made when no one is watching. Principles held firm when compromise offers comfort. Moments of truth when lies would be easier. Marco, yours, though brief as a shooting star across the night sky, runs deeper than mountain. Your wisdom at 8 surpassed what most never grasped in 80 years. Your legacy flows not through bloodline, but through changed lives. Mine, most of all. The impossible cathedral is taking shape. One stone each decision to value authenticity over image adds another block. Each moment of genuine connection without cameras or contract lays another foundation stone. Each act of generosity without press releases builds another flying buttress. What you imagined on paper, I now construct in life. A monument not of stone and glass, but of purpose and truth. On his desk sat an invitation from Cardinal Rossi, handwritten on Vatican stationery, the scarlet border framing elegant script. The Cardinal requested Rory's presence at a private audience to discuss expanding the Marco's Place program to 17 Catholic children's hospitals across Europe, South America, and Africa. The letter mentioned that the Pope's personal archives had been donated to the Vatican Library, including Marco's complete collection of architectural drawings, over 300 designs created during his short life, which could potentially serve as inspiration for the expanded program. Beside this invitation lay another letter, this one from James Holloway, senior editor at The Atlantic, requesting an exclusive, in-depth interview about what Holloway termed Rory's profound career transformation and enigmatic reprioritization of value. The letter promised complete editorial control, a rare offering from such a prestigious publication, and mentioned that several major sports figures had agreed to provide commentary on Rory's evolution, including Tiger Woods and Jack Nicklaus. Rory would accept the Cardinal's invitation, scheduling the meeting during an already planned training break. The letter from Holloway would remain unanswered, joining dozens of similar requests that had accumulated over the past year. The world's curiosity about his transformation, however well-intentioned, felt like an intrusion into something sacred, a process too personal to be dissected in glossy magazines or Sunday supplements. As night fell over Rome, the Eternal City's lights began to twinkle against the deepening blue sky. From his hotel window, Rory could see the dome of St. Peter's Basilica illuminated against the darkness, a testament to faith made visible. Church bells rang in the distance, their bronze voices calling across centuries, reminding listeners of continuity amid change. Rory closed the journal, running his fingers across its leather cover, feeling the slight indentations where his pen had pressed hard during particularly emotional entry. The journal, now nearly full, contained no mention of scores, rankings, or brand deal. Instead, Its pages chronicled moments of clarity, connections forged or rekindled, and quiet victories invisible to the scorekeepers of professional sport. In the morning, he would return to his public life with its obligations and expectations. His calendar still contained tournaments, appearances, and responsibilities to sponsors who had remained loyal through his evolution. But something fundamental had shifted. The foundation beneath him was no longer shifting sand, but something increasingly solid, built choice by choice, stone by stone. The hunted look that once haunted his eyes, captured in thousands of photographs, had been replaced by something steadier, calmer, more grounded. The world would never know about the Pope's final letter or the tears it had triggered. The media would never learn how a dying boy's drawing had remained in Rory's bag through 4 years of competition before finding its way to a wall in a Roman hospital. Some transformations are too profound for public consumption, too sacred for the marketplace of clicks and comments. Some journeys can only be understood by fellow travelers who recognize the terrain of the soul. Some cathedrals rise not in physical space, but in the architecture of a reclaimed soul, invisible to passers-by, but more real than concrete and steel. Their spires reach not toward physical heavens, but toward what makes us most truly human. Their foundations extend not into earth, but into the bedrock of authentic being. And in this way, a dying boy's wisdom and a dying pope's promise created a legacy visible not in headlines or record books, not in viral videos or social media trends, but in the redesigned blueprint of one man's life. A legacy that would, in its own quiet way, touch countless others, children in hospital rooms, donors inspired to contribute, even other celebrities glimpsing an alternative path through the maze of public expectation. Marco's impossible cathedral, once merely graphite on paper, now took form in choices made, priorities shifted, foundations dug, and truth honored, one stone at a time, rising ever upward.